A revelation nobody anticipated. A truth nobody wanted to face. And the second Daddy Dave finally puts it into words, the entire Street Outlaws universe cracks open in ways that might never fully mend. The phone call that broke the night. The digital clock next to Chief's bed showed 2:41 a.m. when his phone suddenly rang, dragging him out of light sleep. His muscles still hurt from hours spent fighting with a difficult Chevrolet that refused to cooperate, and his thoughts were still partly lost in dreams of quarter-mile runs and screaming engines. For a moment he thought about letting it go to voicemail, probably just another racer needing bail money or a tow truck emergency that could wait until morning. But then he saw the name glowing on the screen in the dark, and a cold feeling sank deep into his chest. Daddy Dave never called at this hour unless something had gone terribly wrong. Chief's hand moved on its own, swiping to answer before his brain fully woke up. He pressed the phone to his ear and waited, pulse already climbing into territory that felt risky for someone who'd been surviving on coffee and adrenaline for most of the week. "Chief." Dave's voice came through the line, and it sounded wrong in ways Chief couldn't immediately explain. There was an emptiness in it, a hidden tremble under forced calm that belonged to someone standing on the edge of something irreversible. "I need you to listen to what I'm about to say," Dave went on, "and I need you not to interrupt until I'm finished. Can you do that for me?" Chief swung his legs over the side of the bed, bare feet hitting the cold floor as every nerve snapped to full attention. He'd known Dave for more than 20 years, watched him crawl out of wrecked race cars that looked like crushed tin cans, stood beside him through divorces, bankruptcies, and the kind of losses that break most people, but he had never heard this exact tone in Dave's voice before. This mix of exhaustion, resignation, and barely contained fury that promised whatever came next would change everything they thought they understood about their world. "I found something," Dave said before Chief could respond. "I found something I can't unknow. And once I tell you, once this information leaves the four walls I'm standing in right now, there's no putting it back. The crew, the show, the streets, the brotherhood we've built, all of it is about to be tested in ways we've never faced. And I'm not sure we're going to come out the other side." Chief's mouth went completely dry. His mind raced through every worst-case scenario: federal stings, undercover agents, informants, crashes that weren't accidents. His grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles ached. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Where are you right now?" "The farm," Dave answered. "I need you here in under an hour. Bring Sean and Monza. Nobody else. Not until we figure out exactly what we're dealing with and how far it reaches. If the wrong person finds out I have this evidence before we decide what to do with it, we're all in serious danger." The legend who carried the weight. Daddy Dave's rise through Oklahoma City's underground racing scene wasn't luck or chance. It was forged in fire, built on thousands of hours spent in dimly lit garages where the smell of race fuel mixed with cigarette smoke and raw ambition. That he started as a kid with more heart than experience, racing beat-up cars against seasoned drivers who should have crushed him, but somehow never did. There was something about the way Dave approached racing that set him apart from day one: calculated aggression, a willingness to push both car and driver past any sane limit, and an almost uncanny ability to read a track in the split seconds before the light dropped. The streets of Oklahoma City in the early 2000s were a different universe, a place where reputation was everything and mistakes could cost far more than money. Dave quickly learned that respect in that world wasn't handed out. It was earned through consistent wins and refusing to back down when challenged. He built his first serious race car with borrowed money and junkyard parts, working nights so long they blurred into mornings, dialing in every detail until the car responded like it was part of his own body. When he finally brought that car to the streets and started beating drivers who'd owned those roads for years, people started paying attention. His partnership with Chief became legendary. Two men whose styles perfectly complemented each other in ways that felt almost fated. Chief brought surgical precision and engineering genius, Dave brought pure instinct and a fearlessness that sometimes looked like madness. Together they formed the heart of what would eventually become the 405 crew, a tight group of racers who dominated their territory through skill, strategy, and an unbreakable code of loyalty that carried them through huge wins and crushing defeats. But the path to legendary status was paved with moments that nearly ended it all. Dave's crash in 2015 should have finished him. The kind of violent, physics-breaking impact that turns race cars into twisted scrap and sends drivers to trauma bays labeled critical and uncertain. He eventually walked away from that wreckage, but not without scars that ran far deeper than the ones anyone could see. The recovery was brutal. Months of physical therapy and mental battles against fears that crept in during quiet moments when he had too much time to think about mortality and the razor-thin line between life and death at 200 miles per hour. Through it all, Dave kept up the image of the unbreakable warrior, the driver who could stare down any challenge and come out stronger. The crew looked to him for stability, for the kind of leadership that inspired confidence even when everything looked hopeless. But that image came at a price few outside his inner circle ever understood. Every public appearance, every race, every second in front of cameras demanded he project unbreakable strength, even when his body screamed from old injuries that never fully healed, and his mind wrestled with doubts he couldn't afford to show. The pressure built slowly, drop by drop, until it threatened to overflow. Dave had always been the one others turned to, the steady rock who could absorb their fears and frustrations without breaking. But who does the strong man lean on when his own foundation starts to crack? Who carries the weight when the person everyone depends on can no longer carry it alone? Those questions had been haunting Dave for months before the discovery, creating a vulnerability he hid behind his usual stoic face and dry humor. The shadows had been growing longer for a while. The shadows that grew longer. The first person to notice something was wrong with Daddy Dave was Monza. It happened during what should have been a routine conversation about carburetor tuning in late December 2024. They were standing in Monza's garage, surrounded by the familiar mess of racing parts and half-built engines, talking through technical details that usually led to lively debates and friendly trash talk. But Dave's replies that day were short and distracted. When Monza cracked a joke about a mutual friend's terrible decisions, Dave didn't even smile. He just stared at the workbench, jaw tight, like he was chewing on words he couldn't force out. Monza tried to ask gently, was everything okay at home? Were old injuries acting up again? Was there anything he wanted to talk about over a beer, away from the garage noise and pressure? Dave deflected with practiced smoothness, flashing a smile that never reached his eyes and changing the subject so naturally Monza almost convinced himself he'd imagined the whole thing, almost, but the unease stuck, a splinter under the skin Monza couldn't pull out. Murder Nova noticed it next during a crew meeting in early January while they were planning the season's race schedule and talking about possible challengers from other cities. Dave sat in the corner, unusually quiet, staring at his phone but clearly not reading anything on the screen. When Chief asked for his opinion on whether they should accept a challenge from a Texas crew, Dave's answer came several seconds too late, as if he'd been pulled back from somewhere far away. The answer itself was fine, tactically smart, strategically reasonable. But the delivery felt wrong in ways that set off quiet alarms for anyone paying close attention. The late-night disappearances started around the same time. Dave had always kept strange hours. Street racers rarely live by normal clocks, but this was different. He'd show up at the garage in the early morning hours smelling like road dust and exhaustion, giving vague explanations about scouting new racing spots or meeting parts suppliers that didn't quite add up. When people thought about them later, his phone became glued to his hand. He'd step away from conversations the moment it buzzed, moving to corners where he could speak in low, urgent tones that clearly weren't casual calls. Chief noticed everything, cataloging each odd moment and out-of-character behavior with the same precision he used to diagnose engine problems. He'd known Dave long enough to recognize when something was eating his friend alive from the inside, and this felt bigger than personal issues or money stress. This felt like the kind of weight that reshapes a man's entire face and puts shadows in his eyes that weren't there before. Chief tried several times to create openings for Dave to talk, suggesting late-night drives where they could speak privately, offering help with whatever was clearly crushing him, making it clear there would be no judgment no matter what he needed to say, but Dave stayed locked behind walls he'd built carefully over years, deflecting every attempt at real conversation with the skill of someone who'd practiced avoidance until it became automatic. The crew's frustration built as days turned into weeks and Dave's strange behavior continued without any explanation. Rumors spread in the vacuum of facts. Some thought he might be hiding health problems he didn't want public. Others wondered if personal life issues were being kept from the cameras and public scrutiny that came with the show. The truth, it turned out, was so much worse than anything they had imagined. Dave wasn't pulling away because of private demons or personal struggles. He was pulling away because he had stumbled onto something that threatened to rip apart the very foundation of the family they'd built together. He was desperately trying to figure out how to handle it without destroying everyone he cared about. The weight of that knowledge was slowly crushing him, grinding him down day by day. And the isolation required to keep such a devastating secret was eating him alive from the inside. The evidence that changed everything. The garage where Daddy Dave chose to reveal what he'd found sat on the edge of Oklahoma City. The plain metal building had once been a small manufacturing shop before becoming storage for racing gear. Chief, Sean, and Monza arrived within minutes of each other. Their vehicles pulled into the gravel lot in the pre-dawn dark of a January morning when the temperature hovered just above freezing and their breath hung in visible clouds. None of them had been told exactly why they were being called with such urgency, but Dave's voice had made it clear this wasn't something that could wait for daylight. Dave was already inside. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead threw sharp shadows across a face that looked like it had aged years in weeks. The garage had been cleared of its usual clutter. In the center stood only a folding table surrounded by 4 metal chairs. Spread across the surface were stacks of documents, photographs, computer printouts, financial records marked with yellow highlighter, and handwritten notes in Dave's sharp, angular writing. The sheer amount of material suggested weeks, maybe months, of quiet investigation, countless hours piecing together a puzzle no one else knew existed. Chief felt his stomach drop as he stepped closer and began scanning the papers, racing data that didn't match official records. Telephoto shots of crew members meeting people none of them recognized. Bank statements showing suspicious cash deposits that lined up exactly with races where favored cars suffered sudden, unexplained mechanical failures. Screenshots of text messages using coded language about arrangements, payments, and outcomes that appeared to have been decided before engines even fired. This wasn't rumor or paranoia. This was documented, verifiable proof of deep corruption inside their own circle. "I've been working on this since October," Dave said. His voice was steady despite the faint shake in his hands as he sorted through the papers. "It started when I noticed small irregularities in timing data from last summer's races. Tiny fractions of a second that didn't line up when I cross-checked them against onboard footage and GPS logs. I thought maybe it was just bad equipment or human error at first. But the deeper I dug, the more patterns appeared that couldn't be explained away as coincidence or mistakes." Sean picked up one of the photographs and studied it. His expression moved quickly from confusion to recognition, then settled into something that looked like physical pain. The image showed a longtime crew member, someone they'd raced beside for years, someone invited to family barbecues and birthday parties, someone they'd trusted with their lives on streets where split-second choices meant going home or going to the hospital, meeting a man who worked for a rival racing group. The meeting looked like it was happening behind a restaurant in a part of town where people go when they don't want to be seen. "This goes back at least 2 years, Dave continued, stepping to the head of the table like a prosecutor presenting his case. Maybe longer, but 2 years is as far back as I've been able to trace with certainty. Someone inside our crew has been feeding information to outside groups, sharing details about our cars, our strategies, our plans before races. But it's worse than just leaking intel. There's proof of active sabotage. Races deliberately thrown. Mechanical failures engineered to happen at exact moments. Even crashes we thought were accidents, that may have been set up. Monza's face had gone pale. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow. You're telling us some of the races we lost, some of the crashes that almost killed people, those weren't bad luck or honest mistakes? Someone from inside our own family was working against us? Dave nodded slowly. The simple motion seemed to press down on everyone in the room like a physical force. I'm telling you, someone we've trusted, someone we've protected, defended, treated like blood, has been betraying us for money. Chief's hands had curled into fists at his sides. His breathing came faster as the implications crashed over him. How many close calls could have been avoided? How many wins had been stolen? How many times had they sat together after disappointing nights, consoling each other, promising to work harder, never knowing the real problem wasn't their preparation or performance, but a traitor inside their own circle? Who is it? Sean asked. The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Everyone in that room knew that once the name was spoken, there would be no taking it back, no pretending they hadn't heard what they now knew. The revelation would demand action. It would force choices that would change their racing world forever, and possibly destroy relationships built over decades of shared blood, sweat, and victories. Dave reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out one final sheet of paper. He held it for a moment, then laid it face down on the table. Before I turn this over, he said, I need all of you to understand something. Once you know who it is, once this becomes shared knowledge among us, we're committed to a path that's going to get ugly. There will be confrontations. There will be legal consequences. There will be media attention we can't control. And fallout that will touch everyone in the crew, guilty and innocent alike. People are going to have to choose sides. And not everyone is going to choose the side we think they should. He flipped the paper over. The name on it hit each of them like a physical punch. The silence that followed was total, broken only by distant highway traffic and the harsh buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, because the name on that paper wasn't someone on the edges. It wasn't someone new. It was someone right at the center of their operation, someone whose betrayal felt less like a knife in the back and more like the ground disappearing beneath their feet. When brothers become enemies, the fracture lines appeared within hours of Dave's revelation, spreading far beyond the four men who had gathered in that locked garage. By sunrise, the entire crew knew something catastrophic had been uncovered. Details were scarce. Dave and Chief kept the specifics locked down tight, but enough leaked to poison the air. Suspicion spread fast. Longtime friends turned wary and defensive. The first confrontation exploded at Murder Nova's shop. Crew members showed up under the pretense of working on cars, but quickly made it clear they wanted answers. The accused traitor wasn't there. Dave had insisted they stay away until decisions were made. But their absence only fueled the rage. Accusations flew, not just at the unseen betrayer, but at Dave himself. Who gave you the right to play detective? One crew member shouted. You investigated the family behind our backs, gathered evidence like a cop, then dropped this bomb without letting them defend themselves. Chief cut through the noise. Dave had brought the evidence to him because it was overwhelming and undeniable. This wasn't rumor or suspicion. This was documented betrayal that had cost races, money, and nearly lives. It wasn't something that could be talked away. Still, the crew split in ways no one predicted. Some backed Dave immediately, seeing his actions as necessary to cut out a cancer before it spread further. Others saw him as the destroyer of sacred trust, arguing that internal problems should never be handled with evidence that could end up in the wrong hands. The accused traitor's allies pushed a counter-story. Dave was compromised, driven by resentment, paranoia, or a need for control. His recent withdrawn behavior became proof of instability. They demanded a public confrontation. Dave's refusal, citing concerns about intimidation and evidence tampering, only deepened the divide. Sean found himself caught in the middle. He had reviewed the evidence closely and knew dismissing it would require deliberate blindness, but he had also trusted the accused for years, raced beside them, trusted them with his life. Reconciling hard proof with lived loyalty felt impossible. Then parts of Dave's evidence leaked to crews in other cities. Within 48 hours the story ripped through the underground racing world, twisted and warped by rumor. Past losses were re-examined. Events were cancelled. The reputation the crew had built over years began collapsing under suspicion. Murder Nova tried to mediate, organizing meetings meant to restore unity. Instead they turned into shouting matches. Old grudges resurfaced. Unrelated conflicts were weaponized. The brotherhood that once defined them now felt like an illusion shattered by truth. The toll on Dave was brutal. He'd expected resistance, but not to be treated like an enemy by people he loved. There were moments he wondered if silence would have been easier, if peace built on lies was better than truth that destroyed everything. Then he remembered the injured drivers, the stolen money, the crashes that weren't accidents, and his resolve hardened. Some truths were too important to stay buried, no matter the cost of bringing them into the light. The reckoning, the decision to move forward came on a morning when freezing rain turned Oklahoma City streets into slick black mirrors, conditions where no sane person would race. Yet everyone seemed determined to push limits anyway. Dave sat alone in his garage, surrounded by the cars and equipment that had defined his adult life, holding a phone connected to a lawyer who specialized in fraud and conspiracy cases. The conversation was cold and clinical, focused on evidence standards, potential criminal charges, civil remedies. All terms that felt distant from the emotional devastation tearing through his racing family. If you move forward with this formally, the lawyer said, voice crackling slightly over the line, you need to understand there's no controlling how far it spreads or who gets caught in the blast radius. Law enforcement will get involved. Investigations will extend beyond just the individual you've identified. Financial records will be subpoenaed. People who had nothing to do with the betrayal might still face scrutiny if their names appear anywhere in the documentation. This becomes much bigger than settling a score inside your racing crew. Dave closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of that reality settle across his shoulders. That he had started this investigation simply wanting to understand why things felt off, why patterns weren't matching, why nagging doubts kept him awake. That he hadn't set out to become a whistleblower or trigger the kind of comprehensive destruction the lawyer was describing, but now he stood at a crossroads where both paths looked equally devastating. And the choice felt less like picking a direction and more like deciding which version of catastrophe he could live with. The alternative to going legal was handling it the old way: street justice, internal resolution, the rough frontier ethics the racing underground had followed long before cameras, sponsorships, and lawyers entered the picture. That path meant confronting the traitor directly, letting them face the crew they betrayed, and imposing whatever consequences the community decided were fair. It would be brutal, possibly violent, and leave no official record to set precedent or deter future betrayals, but it would also keep the family's business inside the family, preserving at least the appearance of unity even if the underlying reality was forever broken. Chief arrived as Dave ended the call with the lawyer, walking into the garage without knocking because that's what 20 years of friendship earned you. He didn't ask what decision Dave had reached. He just pulled up a stool and sat down to wait, understanding that some choices can't be rushed and some men need silence more than advice. They sat like that for almost 20 minutes, listening to rain hammer the metal roof and watching gray light filter through dirty windows. I keep thinking about all the times I trusted my gut about people and situations, Dave finally said, voice rough from too many sleepless nights and too much emotional strain. About how I built a reputation on being able to read a race in real time, knowing when to push and when to back off, sensing danger before it appeared. And I completely missed this betrayal happening right under my nose for years. What does that say about my judgment? Chief shook his head slowly. Your instincts didn't fail you. They're what made you notice the irregularities in the first place. What drove you to dig deeper when everyone else was happy to accept surface explanations? The betrayal happened because someone got very good at hiding it, not because you stopped being good at seeing. Don't let this destroy your confidence in what makes you exceptional. The words helped, but they didn't make the decision easier. Dave stood and walked to the workbench where a photograph leaned against a toolbox, an image from 5 years earlier showing the entire crew gathered after a major win. Arms around shoulders, genuine smiles that spoke of shared joy and achievement, the accused traitor stood near the center, looking for all the world like someone who belonged there and would never dream of betraying the people who'd lifted them up. I'm moving forward, Dave said. The words felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing how far the fall would be. I'm turning everything over to the authorities and letting the investigation go wherever it leads. If that means some of our crew faces consequences for things they didn't directly do. If that means the show gets cancelled or our reputation gets destroyed or people I care about decide I'm the villain in this story, then that's what happens. Because the alternative is living with the knowledge that I let a betrayal slide because confronting it was too hard or too damaging to my comfort. The formal complaint was filed 3 days later, triggering exactly the kind of wide-reaching investigation the lawyer had warned about. Federal agents began interviewing crew members, subpoenaing financial records, examining race footage with forensic detail. The story broke first in racing media, then spread to mainstream outlets fascinated by the collision of underground culture and betrayal. Cameras that once captured victories now filmed a racing family tearing itself apart under accusations and counter-accusations. The accused traitor was arrested on charges including fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, legal terms that felt surreal when applied to street racing but reflected the serious scale of their systematic deception. Their defense team immediately went on the attack, painting Dave as a vindictive former friend driven by jealousy. Some crew members publicly supported that narrative, appearing in interviews where they questioned Dave's motives and character in ways that would have been unthinkable just months earlier, but others rallied behind Dave with surprising force. Monza organized a public show of support, gathering drivers from multiple crews to make clear that standing against internal corruption was courage, not betrayal. Murder Nova used his platform to defend Dave's integrity, arguing that brutal truths must be confronted even when doing so is painful. Even crew members who'd been skeptical at first began reconsidering as more details emerged and the full scope of the betrayal became impossible to deny. The legal process would take months, possibly years, to fully resolve. And the street outlaws world would never return to the innocent simplicity it had before Dave's discovery. Trust, once broken so deeply, can't be perfectly restored, even with time and effort, but something unexpected rose from the wreckage, a harder, more honest version of community that acknowledged human imperfection while still demanding accountability. Daddy Dave would carry the scars of this period for the rest of his life, would always bear the burden of being the one who shattered the beautiful lie that once held them together, but he would also know that, when faced with the hardest choice of his racing career, he had chosen truth over comfort, accountability over blind loyalty, and the painful growth that comes from confronting betrayal instead of pretending it didn't exist. That knowledge wouldn't erase the cost, but it would make the burden bearable. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. and before you go, make sure to check out the other videos playing on your screen right now.